What if the diagnosis you feared most turned out to be your greatest teacher? Welcome to Divine Decode. Today's conversation invites a radical reframe where illness isn't an enemy to defeat but a messenger asking us to listen more deeply. This episode is about courage, curiosity, and the quiet intelligence of the body, with someone who didn't just survive her diagnosis but let it transform her entire relationship with life. Dayna Wylder, it's so nice to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love to talk about this and to be an inspiration and a hope for other people.
Yes, truly. So, Dana, when you were first diagnosed with MS, what story did your mind immediately tell you about your future?
I think that I had taken some courses in university about brain and behavior, so I was already a little bit familiar with MS. So when I first started to experience symptoms, I think that my mind kind of contemplated that could be what it was, but I didn't get taken serious. I was just coming off the loss of my firstborn son who had passed away, and I was pregnant again. And I think people just kept thinking that it was all in my head. And
Mm.
now I've come full circle and I understand it kind of is because it is emotionally based, everything that happens in the physical body. But at the time, that felt insulting to me that
Mm.
people were kind of just saying, oh, you're just crazy or you're just dramatic or making it up. And when I finally did get a diagnosis, I think that the real saving grace for me was that I actually didn't really believe my doctor that it was permanent. I had looked up by the time I'd done my first MRI and I had knew that it was MS now, and I was going to meet with the neurologist. I had done some research and I thought, okay, it's possible for lesions to shrink and go away. And it's also possible to not get new ones. So I presented that to the doctor the first time I met with him and said, so I can cure it. And he laughed me off and he was like, no, absolutely not. Prepare to be in a wheelchair within 10 years, keep a job with benefits. All we can really do for you is give you these poisonous drugs that kill your immune system and just kind of watch you slowly decline. And I think I knew right there in that moment that none of that was gonna make sense to me, that that was not my path. And, I think the mistake I made in the beginning, though, was pushing through instead of listening to my body. I sort of tried to will myself out of it by pushing further when my body really probably needed rest. And in some ways, it worked in the beginning for me because on my 10-year anniversary of diagnosis, I did a triathlon, right? So it was kind of like to me proving the doctor wrong. Looking back, I'm not really sure pushing through endurance running as a way to further put stress on the body was probably the right thing to do, but certainly not believing in a poor prognosis was because I think it's actually a little irresponsible of doctors to give us always this worst case scenario. And I know they're protecting themselves in some way from liability or from other issues, but our mind is so powerful that when somebody tells you, oh, you have cancer, you have 6 months to live, for some people, they put that limitation on themselves and they'll die in 6 months, right? And so I think that there is an obligation for us to have faith in our own bodies, to build relationship with our bodies, and to really see the symptoms and the diagnosis as a signal, a message, something that needs attention, and not just either a fated thing or something that we have to fight against.
And Dana, was there any moment where your whole story or life began to crack because of MS?
Well, yeah, part of the emotional trauma of developing the MS was definitely not just losing my son, but being in a very abusive marriage for decades. And once I was diagnosed, the thought that I was going to leave this new child with this partner or have him as my caregiver was really scary to me. And, I felt very much, responsible for all the things in life, like, I was a breadwinner of the family, I was working, I was the mom, I was just responsible. I had so many things to do, and all of a sudden, the MS was slowly eroding one thing at a time, and especially in the last I had a major relapse 5 years ago, and that's when I really had to start taking the MS serious because it led me to a point where I had to crawl, I had to be carried to bed, somebody had to feed me, to wash me, um, and so all of a sudden, all those things that I had identified with myself my whole life, like I'm a runner, I'm a dancer, I'm an artist, I'm a mother, all of a sudden all those egos had to start to dissolve because I could do none of those things. I couldn't hold a pen, I couldn't dance, I couldn't even walk, stand up, let alone run. And so you really it doesn't just affect your body. It affects the entire persona or the avatar you've sort of played throughout your life because it all starts to fade away and crack. And you start to realize like what is actually underneath all of those things. Right. And that was the thing I'd ignored for so long, which is that I am a soulful being. Right. I am attached. I'm divine. I am just as worthy. I'm just as much part of the love and the light as the compassion I would give to anybody else. But yet somehow I had failed to nurture or honor that within myself.
I feel like that should have been a very big shift for you from a future that was pre planned, decided, to a one that became a little uncertain, which also makes me curious about how you now relate to the diagnosis itself, not just the fear around it. You say MS became a gift, right? That can feel confronting to many people, especially those who are still suffering. What do you mean by that?
Well, for myself, and I think that this is probably for a lot of other people, we've been conditioned, and we also live in a society where we really ignore the subtle symptoms. Right? We don't really live in enough quiet and in enough reflection to let our inner voice, that divine part of ourselves, our higher consciousness, right, really speak to us. And so a lot of us live dissociated from our lives. And whether that's overeating or drinking or scrolling social media, we ignore our bodies a lot. And for a lot of people, it only ever stays as that sort of low level anxiety, discontent, maybe depression, of being a little overweight. It never becomes such a full-fledged diagnosis and severe as MS did. So for those people, they might go through an entire life not having to be forced to live in alignment and purpose, right? They only just get to live in that low level of just discontent for an entire life. In my case, I ignored my symptoms for so long that eventually they screamed at me and they couched me and they said, like, stop ignoring me, like, listen. And my body just completely gave up because I had dissociated from it for so long. And now why I see that as a gift is because, right now, even take in this moment right now, my MS is probably the worst it's been in 5 years. And for a lot of people that they would see that then as failure or as punishment. For me, I see it as a compass, right? It is something that now tells me, slow down. Right? We're in the holiday season here. I'm releasing a book right now. I'm very busy with my business. And all of a sudden, again, even though it's aligned with my passion, which is helping people, I'm taking on too much. And my MS now is an immediate, mirror for me, and it says, "Okay, you need to just, take some more time to meditate every morning. You need to practice self-care a little better. Make sure you stay on your diet. Make sure that you're, really not just pushing through, but listening to your body and taking time." And so for me, that really seems like a gift because, uh, what other way would I so immediately know that I'm off of path and how to get back on? And so it's not really sometimes your pain can become the cure because it is just like being in a good relationship with somebody that it's almost like them holding up a mirror for your own behavior. My body now does that for my mind to tell my mind, okay, you're taking on too much.
I feel like that's such a powerful way to look at illness as a compass that steers your direction or flow of your life. But it also makes me curious, do you think everyone can see illness that way as a compass? Or is it something that is acquired through lived in pain?
I think that we all have to kind of go through the experience ourselves to come to that realization. It's one thing for me to say something to somebody, but for most of us, we need to actually have lived it and experienced it. So, I hope that when people read my book or they work with me, that it gives them like a kickstart into things to look for and ways that they can help themselves. But I think ultimately, we need to feel our pain because our pain really, it's what, it's one of these things I like to think about that if you want to have your branches go high into the sun and into the sky and to bloom beautifully, then you have to have roots that are just as equal. And when you grow your roots in the dark, in the depth, in the murk, that it hurts. It has to break rock. It has to break ground. It has to go through drought and darkness in order for you to reach your branches high. So yes, I do think that going through struggle is, I mean, because life is duality, that the more we struggle sometimes, the more we're able to see the beauty in the things around us and to have gratitude. And so, it does, I think people do need to go through some level of sitting with their own pain and discomfort first. And oftentimes our body is a reflection of what's going on in the mind and the emotional field first. And because the reason that these oscillations or energy gets stuck in the body, which will ultimately manifest as disease or illness at some point, in order for us to go backwards, sort of, and go through the process, we have to sit with those uncomfortable emotions sometime. Like, we have to be able to just sit with ourselves. And the reason why people distract themselves with addictions and shopping, gambling, all of these things is because for a lot of us, it's uncomfortable to sit with ourselves. Right? So
Yes.
the idea of sitting just silently and being with yourself is a place, and living in your own body too, for a lot of people that have been maybe victimized or injured or hurt or even a diagnosis because you stop to trust your body. It's not comfortable always to be embodied, right? Or to live in presence with yourself, but you need to do that in order to find your way through. And
Yes.
there's a certain level of discomfort that unfortunately comes with that because the human experience is tragic and beautiful. And you take all the emotions and you take all the experiences, and I think the path to healing is finding gratitude in all of them and meaning.
Mm. Yes, yes. There's something my mom tells me every day. It's that if you don't acknowledge the darkness around you, you won't be seeing the light around you either. So it is really necessary to embrace the darkness, the negativity too, so that you can accept the positive sides. And it's like saying, overcoming restraints and going through pain brings out your best potential. And I feel like that distinction really matters, especially for someone who's still going through that pain. And it opens the door to the meaning and biology coexist. Which brings me to how you actually approached healing. Your work weaves together neuroscience, energy healing, and ancient wisdom like the five koshas. Where did you feel the biggest disconnect in yourself before healing began?
Well, I think the first really transformative part was because I think we get the physical body wrong a lot, even though that's the one we live in the most, because we have this illusion that that's really where life lives and resides and ends, is in the physical material world. And I felt like that was the first place I tried to conquer, and I did yoga as far as the asanas or the poses. I didn't do it as a spiritual path. In the beginning, it was more just like exercise. And I did physiotherapy and I did the diet and I did fasting and I did so many things, and it was wonderful, and those things are beneficial because you have to treat your physical body still. And I got to a certain point, but I really plateaued. The first time I really seen something in a whole new way, and it was synchronicity. Again, I went to go do a colonics at a place a couple towns away from me, and I was looking at their sign, and it said PEMF, and I had no idea what that was. And so I asked the lady, "Oh, what is this?" And she goes, "Oh, well, my boss is on the machine right now, but I'm sure she won't mind if you come in while she's in there to show you what it is." So it was called pulse magnetic field therapy. And I had never heard of it before. But what really struck me is when I looked at her, she stood up and she had the same disease my father has, which is very rare, ankylosing spondylitis. They were around the same age, but this woman looked like a ballerina. Like, she stood up completely straight. She was radiant. And yes, she was gray haired and she was older, but she looked vital. Like, you could see the energy just coming out of her. And in contrast to my father, who had done the pharmacological route, who was so sick and now had multiple other diseases, couldn't walk, was very ill. And I thought, how can these 2 have the same disease? So I was like, immediately, I'm like, yes, I want to try this. I want to do this. And I never thought of myself as a depressed person, and I've always been optimistic and joyous. But that relapse, it took so much out of me. And at that point, I was still couldn't walk and couldn't see. As I laid on that machine, for the first time in since a relapse had happened, I started to notice the clouds outside and how beautiful they were. And those small little things that give you bliss in life, right? Like sunsets
Mm.
and a baby's gummy smile and the things that just like fill you. And I thought I felt full, and I was like, wow, I didn't even notice I stopped feeling like this because I've been so in my body that I never worried about my happiness. But this
Mm.
machine all of a sudden gave me the extra energy to not even just physically feel better, but to just have the energy to start spending on something as trivial at the time as happiness. And I could see when I left the traffic lights and read the stop signs, and I was like, I need this machine. And even though they're super expensive, I bought a really powerful clinical one, and I laid on
Mm.
it for like 4 hours a day for a year. And that extra energy in my body really gave me what I needed to start doing yin yoga on the floor. And then it
Mm.
gave me a little more energy so now I could stand up and cook a healthy meal for myself. And then it gave me a little more energy so that I could walk and sit outside in the backyard and listen to the birds. And every time I
Mhm,
got that little bit of energy, I used it to do something else beneficial to my body. But
mhm,
at some point, I still plateaued because adding more energy, if you have an incorrect information field, it kind of again stalls out because your body doesn't know what to do with that energy. And that's when
mhm,
I came across the next level of healing, which was hypnotherapy and bioresonance, where I started looking at information medicine, where it was now about correcting the blueprint. So what is going on wrong in your thought process, in the blueprint of the energy field of your biofield, your body's energy system, and correcting those pieces that had been out of alignment or out of tune. Because that way now your body can start to not only maintain the energy you put into it, but can start to create its own energy again, and all of those other things you do downstream of that, whether even if it is doing, like, doing prescription medication or chemo or rehab, any of those other things, they become more effective if the information is governing the energy to go to those processes in the biochemistry. So you can't just do one layer of healing because your body isn't only one thing. Right? The idea that we separate a mind and a body from a soul, it's not possible because they're all connected. They're all one and the same. They all come from the same source. They're just, different manifestations. They're different tools that are being used by our soul in this 3D realm.
mhm. And listening to you, I can understand that healing isn't like a one layer process. It needs to go through different layers. So I'm curious, which layer surprised you most once you started listening to it?
So I mean, it surprised me, I think, the most that we get the physical body wrong, considering that most of us live there all the time, right? Like most of us only think of ourselves as this physical body. And we also, at least here, because I'm in Canada, in the Western medical system, it's primarily only focuses on the physical body, but yet we still somehow mess that one up so badly. And we can see that in the obesity rates and the opioid crisis and how many autoimmune diseases like MS are on the rise now. That even at that fundamental level, which is illusionary still, that we are a physical body, we still can't seem to even get that one right, you know? And
Mhm,
so it doesn't, and that one is really foundational too, because although, like I was saying, the happiness and your bliss body, so that thing that kind of connects you to your purpose and to the divine, it is a beautiful place to be, and we all wanna be living there. Because when we get that one right, it's easier if we don't get the other ones right underneath it because it kind of is an overarching energy that's, like, high
mhm,
vibe. But if we don't get the physical one right at the bottom, that's life and death, right? Like, that one actually has such a high consequence. Like, you can go through your whole life and maybe not be happy and still make it through a whole life. Now, was that a meaningful life? Maybe not. Could we have done better? Absolutely, we should be looking for those higher purposes. But it is possible to make it through, 80 years of your life without being happy and without having purpose. But you can't get the physical one wrong, right? If we don't breathe and we don't eat and we don't take care of ourselves, we physically die. So
mhm.
it surprised me that the one that's the most we think of as we live in concrete is actually the most illusionary, but it also is the one that we fundamentally get wrong. Like, there's so many just like conundrums there and so many things that I found it hard to reconcile that we spend so much time in that one but get it wrong.
Yes, it's almost ironic to think that the physical body that we are so much aware about, that the one we think we're living in, is the one that we're most wrong about. We have most misconceptions about. And what you're describing makes it clear that healing wasn't happening in just one place. It was happening across different layers. And that actually reframes how we even think about treatment. So let's go deeper into that. You talk about restoring communication between body, mind, and soul, not fixing what's broken. How does this challenge the traditional medical mindset?
Yes, I mean, in the traditional one, all we're worried about is just fixing a broken problem. We separate things
Mhm.
down into, syndromes or diseases, into organs, into processes, and we just jump in there and we think, well, if we just, say you have high blood pressure, we'll just give you a medicine for that and that'll fix it. But we never think about, well, what's really causing high blood pressure? Well, that's related to our kidneys as well. and the nephilims in the kidneys. And so maybe is there something with hydration? And then maybe the hydration, is there something with the structured water, right? Is the information in the water even correct that's going into the body? The kidney can also be associated with fear, with the emotion. So is there an emotion around that that's connected? Because energetically, all of these things are interconnected. And we don't separate them and just treat one thing. So we have to then look at the entire being. And it's like, well, has something happened to this person that has manifested in that body because it shares a similar energy frequency to, like, when we're developing as a baby and embryo, there's something called germination theory. And as the egg gets fertilized and it has a first spark of life, as it develops at different stages, everything that developed at that stage has an energetic signature that's similar, which is why you can end up seeing that the liver, the gallbladder, and the eyes and anger are all things that are connected. And
Mm.
even though they aren't in the same physical place in the body, they all developed at the same time in the embryo. And so they share this pattern. So then we start to look at the body and we think, well, what also happened during gestation to the mother at that time? Was the mother being stressed out at the time when something happened there? And, so now maybe these physical imbalances in the body of the person, maybe they had their roots in something that's, beyond what if the doctors just go in and they just treat and they cut something out or they suppress the symptom, we've never really gotten to what actually caused that and what we need to do to support it, not removing it and suppressing it, but coming back into balance so that,
Mm.
it comes back into a field that's coherent and a system that's all supporting of each other. Because, even when I do my scans, my bioresonance scans, one thing that I always found interesting is that I can usually tell when somebody has had a hysterectomy or they've had their appendix taken out because I can
Mm.
see on the scan that something will show up in their appendix. And usually that's a sign to me because even though in essence their appendix is no longer in their body, the energy signature of the appendix is still there and it's still kind of screaming out saying, "Hey, what did you do to me? What happened?" And it's showing up on their scan even though they don't have one anymore. And to me that just shows that you're holographic in nature and that your blueprint is, for most of us, was we were born with it intact, and most of us get sick over time. Some of us unfortunately are born with genetic, abnormalities or things, and our blueprint maybe was already off from the beginning. But most of us started in balance, and over time, we unhealthy lifestyles, bad food, not enough sleep, whatever negative things we've done to ourselves, that we become sick. So looking then at the body as how do we go back to where we were before we were sick? And
Mm.
certainly we don't do that by cutting parts of us out or by suppressing our symptoms or also not seeing the holistic nature of how one thing connects to another thing and how we need all parts of ourselves, right?
Right.
And the emotions and our mindset are inseparable from our body.
Yes, yes. I feel like we don't listen to our body enough because I've seen people taking instantly medication because one thing is working different in their body than the normal. To give you an example, people here, they take medication for fever if their body temperature is increasing just by 1 degree centigrade or 2 degrees. And it so happens that if you get a cold, the body temperature rises naturally to kill that bacteria, to kill that virus in your body. So what you're essentially doing by taking that medication is that you're not allowing your body to kill that bacteria naturally. You're just stopping it from doing its work. So I feel like we're taking action instantly. We should maybe listen to our body more, uh, l- write a pre-plan, understanding how the where the core root problem is really necessary. And I feel like what you're saying is exactly that because it's reframing from fixing to listening because it really shifts the power dynamic in healing. It also makes me wonder how this experience reshaped your sense of self, not just your health. If MS hadn't entered your life, who do you think you would be today?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that I would definitely still be stuck in a career path that didn't interest me, right? Because I would still be working in my corporate job and being out of alignment with what I actually really seen for myself. Like I know when I was younger, I was an artist and I always did creative jobs and I loved public speaking and helping people. But
Mm.
through this idea of becoming what society wants from us, I was like, well, I better go to university and I better get the job with benefits and I better climb this ladder and I better be all these things for other people. And I said yes all the time when I meant no, because I still then had the energy to not have to have boundaries. Right. And so I really gave up a life in service to something that really didn't speak to myself. MS has sort of given me this ability to step back and sometimes I have to say no now. And maybe I mean there's something about that too that other people respect my no more now too because they think, "Oh, well, she's sick, so we can't ask so many things and they don't demand as much from me." And there's even maybe something energetically about that as thinking about why do we get diseases? Maybe in some ways that's protective, right? Because I never had to go to my job again and I didn't have to do these things I didn't want to do anymore. It almost was a way for me to give myself permission. And again, I don't wanna make people out there think that I blame them for their diseases, but sometimes we do need to take a step back and think, "Well, how did this benefit me in some way?" Because sometimes the universe doesn't do things to you, it does it for you. And so maybe if I didn't set boundaries and I didn't set my life path, effectively enough, the MS kinda pushed me to do it. And so this is when we were talking about it as a gift, as looking at it and reframing it another way. But I think that I definitely would have been on the trajectory that I see a lot of people around me, a lot of my clients that come to me where we just live not quite sick enough to be motivated to change, but, also just not really living, a life that we really wanted to live.
Yes, I feel like MS essentially gave you the opportunity in a way to question the laid out, pre planned succession plan by the factors like society. And that's one way to look at it. And I feel like at the end of the day, it's your choice, it's your perspective that you can make. So it's all in your hands. That was such an insightful conversation with you. So thank you for joining on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. This conversation isn't about romanticizing illness or denying hardship. It's about expanding the way we listen to our bodies and question the stories we've been taught about healing. If something in you stirred while listening, let that curiosity guide you. Soften, listen, and begin a different dialogue with yourself. Because healing may not start with fixing, but it can start with remembering. Thank you for listening. This was Divine Decode with your host, Charu.